Just
Hey everyone, welcome to the Joint Sports Psych and Cricket Mentors session. Um, I am going to jump off straight away and hand over to Camilla and talk about what she's going to be doing with Charlie.
Thanks, Ross. Go ahead,
okay.
Cam.
I'm just
Go
gonna
for it.
sorry, I'm just sharing the PowerPoint slides.
Super.
Sorry, I'm so used to using Teams at the moment, and then it's going back.
So, Charlie, if you want to talk about what we're going to do, well, what you two are going to be talking about tonight, and then let Camilla get yourself ready.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, hi everyone. Good to be on the call. Hope everyone's having a good start to the week. So tonight we're going over some profiling stuff. So we're going to use what I did when I was in cricket with professional cricket at Worcester, and Cam was the sports psych for Worcestershire at the time, and we a select few did a ECB profiling of kind of like how I personally perform well, what my strengths were, that and areas that actually I needed to work on. So we're going to use that as a template and then go through it. And then hopefully you can start to think about what that looks like for yourselves. We'll make it interactive. So, please do be forthcoming. Please do ask questions. Please also, if you feel comfortable in doing so, speak about what your strengths are, but also what your weaknesses are. And it's a really good opportunity to ask questions to Cam with all her knowledge, but also myself, I guess, from some of my experience and stuff. But I'll hand over to Cam there. Is there anything I've missed out?
Yeah, that's cool. So I know, so our last session with Moz was actually back in July. And I know we did talk about snippets of the sort of performance breakdowns, and we did definitely talk about some of your super strengths and how sometimes they can be, counterproductive sometimes, perfectionism overdone or overtraining, that logical mindset. We did talk about that, but what I wanted to do is really use the profile to kind of explain how we went about it. And I know I've mentioned it to everyone else around the ECB profiling and how it was used, but I think it's going to be really just useful to recap what the performance breakdowns are, because that's going to be really useful for everyone. Of course, we can't get our own profile done because it does require lots of time, effort, money, and lots of different people involved. But we can hold ourselves accountable to try and measure some of these different areas and focus on where are my strengths here and what things do I struggle with in relation to the 7 breakdowns. So I think that's what I'm going to start off with. It's just giving you guys the information to just start reflecting. And obviously we're going to talk about Charlie's specific profile and what his breakdowns were, and how we address those, and what things we discuss and what things we did in training, what that looks like as like a snapshot. But I want this to relate to you guys too, based on what can you take from it. So it's really, really useful to understand what those breakdowns are. Can everyone hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Yeah.
All good.
Okay, so just as a bit of a like summary of this was the ECB framework, is we wanted all the players to understand like what is pressure. So it's really any factor. It's not just mindset. There's lots of different factors in terms of your physiological makeup and how we respond to things, and our personality traits and how that person is. So it really goes further and beyond more than what we expect. So it's very individualized. And we need to understand, what are those different perspectives? So when we're kind of collecting data, it was very much a holistic data collection. So the players had their own self-assessments. So they filled in some quite detailed questionnaires based on their strengths, their weaknesses, their questions based on their personality, being a team player, what happens under pressure, what happens when they're anxious, how do they react and respond, how do they respond to reward, how do they respond to forfeits and negative outcomes and things like that. And then we also got a very, very detailed feedback from coaches and obviously also Sports Psych, which was myself at the time, and coaches, head coaches, and physios, S&C coach, all involved in that personalized feedback. And then there was a psychologist on the day that came in and also did a snapshot interview as well. And then there were also some psychometric tests where players were put in a sort of pressure task and were hooked up with EEGs. So it very much was a holistic data collection. So we looked at every different element from different angles of how as much as we could. Okay, so this is just a summary of what I've basically just said. So we did the ECG. Looking at the internal process is basically the heart rate variability. So that's the space in between each heartbeat. So it's very much looking at the parasympathetic nervous system response. Qualitative observations from all the coaches. And as I said before, player feedback. So there are 27 characteristic variables. And I will talk about some of the big personality traits that we look at when we're doing profiling, because you'll all find it very interesting. Here are some of them. So some of the big ones, you'll hear about the big five when we're looking at sort of psychological profiling. So this is like your characteristic profiling that I'm talking about. And some of the big ones that you would have heard quite a lot would be, you know, your introversion, extroversion. That would come up on quite a lot of the other profiles. If you've heard of Myers-Briggs, insights, which the Olympic cycle would have previously used, they use Mindflick now, that we do look at a lot of those big areas. So the introversion, extroversion, that's very much where you get your energy from. And that's something to consider, because it is very much relative to your performance needs. Is, do you get your energy from switching off and being sort of a bit more internalizing sometimes and just having to have your time on your own to recharge your batteries? Or do you actually recharge your batteries through the connectedness and relatedness with other people? Conscientiousness, that is one of the big ones that we looked at, particularly in regards to training, how conscientious we are as a person in terms of our individual efforts, but also being part of a team. Psychoticism, this word kind of scares people off because we would be concerned perhaps if we scored high in the psychoticism, and lots of players did. And what that really means is our kind of levels of going up and down, and our reactiveness and our emotional stability. So we'll come on to that later on. But doesn't necessarily per se mean we're psychos. And it's also to do with our relatedness, so how we are able to relate to other people and understand other people and their needs. Perfectionism, that's a really big one in sport, obviously. We often think perfectionism is something that we really, really want, something that's important to get everything right, but actually it can be our biggest Achilles heel in training. Because when we overdo something or we only have that perfectionist mindset, it really stops us from being able to try and make mistakes and learn from making mistakes and how we actually respond to mistakes, because we don't allow ourselves to make mistakes. Or when people try really, really hard to do one thing and then, you know, almost they have to scrap it all just because it wasn't perfect and then start again. And so, you know, we get to that sort of time wasting and overtraining, and that can be a big burden on, you know, injury and those kind of things. Control, I bang on about control a lot. So we've got the emotional control, attentional control, that's about our focus. So these are the different areas that we specifically looked at. Has anyone got any questions specifically on the sort of self-report areas? Because these are all areas that you can kind of almost just have a quick little think about yourselves in regards to how high or low you think you would score on some of these. Has anyone got any questions? No. Some of these here are a bit more specific to performance. So the movement specific reinvestment, which I will talk about later. Okay, so I know I've discussed these before, but I think this is the main meat, and this is the really interesting part. And I want everyone just to really understand what those 7 performance breakdowns are. So what I would suggest, and I'm happy to send these 7, I think I've already sent them, but Juicy, I'll send the 7 performance breakdowns again after this session for anyone that doesn't have them. We sometimes tick 1, or we might tick all 7. It's trying to understand when we break down what happens and which category do we often fit in, because we need to understand first the sort of the why behind the what before we then say, right, we need to work on this, and this, oh, I overthink. Well, what is that? Why do I overthink? What am I overthinking about? What are these distractions? And then we understand it first before we target the deficit. Okay, so the first one's poor threat detection. So this is someone who is not necessarily that prudent, someone that's not very sort of like threat detector, someone that's very anxious. This is someone that is so optimistically engaged. This is like myself. I just go for the cheese and just a bit gung-ho sometimes and doesn't think things through. And what can happen is that big red bus comes around the corner and hits you because you haven't even considered where it's coming from. Okay, so we talk about the cat and the mouse and the cheese. It's that person that just runs in straight gung-ho, goes for that cheese, but has not even thought about the cat, the threat in that room. So it kind of becomes this sort of a little too late situation. So it's that imbalance of not being careful, cautious. Second one is impulsive decision making, quite similar to this one here. Again, it's quite gung-ho towards the reward sensitivity, but making quick decisions without considering the consequences. Third one's a reinvestment. We're going to talk about this with Moz, because Moz, this is one of yours, wasn't it? On your profile, if I can jog your memory back. But this is the sort of taking conscious control of normally automatic movements. We found that this did affect like pretty much most of the bowlers, and that's quite a common, when we spoke back with the ECB, we found it was quite a common performance breakdown with all bowlers. And this is basically where obviously our run up, our whole movement as a whole should be an automatic process. But what happens when anxiety kicks in and we focus too much, let's say, on the outcome, or we're thinking too much, what happens is we try and take too much conscious control of our body movements. And what happens is it kind of ends up making us very clunky and robotic, and we start fixing on specific body parts and body movements. So if we've been working on X, Y, and Z, we start to sort of sometimes overly focus on, let's say, your left hip angle or your foot placement or whatever it is that you're focusing on with the biomechanics or your technical areas with Juicy. Is it can then, if we focus too much on those small parts, sometimes it can really take us away from that flow, that flow state that we really need under pressure. So we will come on to that. Moz, do you want to say anything about that one yet?
Can do. Yeah, I mean, I just going on the reinvestment side of thing, I think it's quite a common thing for all bowlers, and I would say we spend a lot of time doing technique with bowling. We do a lot of time trying to improve our technique. We try to, the winter comes around, like, we whatever technical flaws we have, we do spend a lot of time trying to improve that, and I think that can sometimes be the root cause, I think, to why a lot of bowlers go to reinvestment, because that is we're always trying to trying to get the perfect action or improve it, or I haven't met many bowlers which are like totally happy with their bowling action, with their technique. And so when it comes under pressure, I think we spend a lot of time in the winter working on technique and stuff, which is important, but to then just kind of like detach ourselves from that and not worry about it in a game situation and stuff is difficult. And I think I just talking kind of out loud here without thinking it through, I think that's probably why. that's all I have to say on it for now.
Yeah. And I think it is, like you say, it's really important that we practice our different modes. So when it's the winter and we've got all the time in the world, we have that developmental practice where we're exploring, we're trying out new things, we're doing lots of volume training because we're allowing ourselves to explore different areas of that development side, whether it's you're developing your technique or the biomechanics side of things, and you're trying different things. That's very important. But then obviously when we get more into towards pre-season and mid-season, is making sure that we switch off from specifically looking at those like compartmentalized areas of the body, and then we practice more performance mode, which is what do I look like as a whole when I'm under pressure, when I have these targets. Okay, when I'm giving myself there's a competitive scenario, we've got to apply that technique, but we're applying it under pressure. Batters versus bowlers, very different compared to doing something 50 times trying to tweak one little specific biomechanics area or developmental area. So it's very important that we do specifically train with different modes. So you've got performance mode, which is obviously practicing under pressure, pre-performance mode, which is ensuring that we practice how we want to prepare us for under pressure. So that's what does my warm-up look like? What does the day before look like? And making sure we do practice that, practicing your preparation basically. And then we had the developmental practice, which is basically the volume practice that we're doing sort of in the winter, and the tweaks and the changes and the biomechanics. So making sure you're purposeful in all those three different modes.
Sorry, Cal, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to jump in very quickly. I'm just looking back. If I had a look at my whole career of winter training, sorry, where I started to I had 10 winters really where I kind of worked on technical stuff, and actually the best winter I had was the winter of end of 2018 going into 2019, and I did a lot of technical work. But what we did, and Juicy will back this up, I'm sure, was the technical work was actually done through. I didn't have to think about what my body was doing in those technical sessions. We kind of just put some things in place, didn't we, Juicy? I bowled with like a weighted vest, or and it's very much based around that kind of the bowling specific gym session. So I'd do it, but the critical bit was
it was the start.
Yeah, but
I
was
just going to say this was the very start of it.
Yeah. But during those sessions, I was always focused on trying to hit the top of off stump. So I never just bowled into a net, Juicy, or like very rarely. During those sessions with you and Alan, I had a like top of off stump target on, and I was bowling and I was judging myself on the outcome. But because I was bowling with a weighted vest, or I was doing, whatever it was, doing it with the run rocket or something, for like 2 balls out of the 6, and then like 3 or 4 without, whatever it was. The technique was naturally sorting itself out and improving. And all I had to do that winter, I was just outcome. And I appreciate this was like right at the start, and things moved on from there and stuff. But for me personally, that worked really, really well. So I never had to think too technically.
If I jump in there, then, mate, what I was saying is, so that was the start of our bowling conditioning work, where we could see that if we gave the body the right inputs, we could get the right outputs. And that's why, for the guys listening in, this is why the bowling conditioning sessions are so important. And when we see people mess up, is they just either skate over it, or they maybe do 1 or 2 and then just go and bowl in the nets. If you just bowl in the nets on its own without these things, and we still need to make changes to the body, you're never going to see the changes. Like Charlie said, that winter, he was able we would sort his body out through the drills, and all he thought about was the bowling. We made it super easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't have to worry about what my back leg was doing, or my front arm, or trying to put. I was just bowling and thinking about trying to hit the top of a stump. But the stuff that Juicy put in place just they sorted all that out, and it was just it just hit the sweet spot, and did that for 4 months, and the rewards were were great. Sorry, that was just I've gone slightly off.
No, that's
and
really interesting.
yeah,
So
some
it
feedback.
kind of goes against what I was saying in the sense that we separate those different training modes, but actually it sounds like there was a purpose for both areas. You wanted to stay in that flow state, which was keep focusing on my target, keep focusing on the outcome based on what I want to achieve, but you're still constraining the environment by doing that developmental practice based on the strength work. But Juicy, in that scenario, what was the purpose for you then? What was the
The
purpose
purpose,
putting the weight vest on, just from a bystander's point of non-cricket
yeah,
point of
well,
view?
so
What were you trying to
there's,
achieve with that?
it depends which part it was. There was, it'd probably do two or three exercises, which he
Mm,
was thinking about. So say if we were working particularly with Moz on ankle stiffness or lower limb stiffness, he
mm,
would be thinking about that doing the exercise. But then as soon as he was bowling, he was just thinking bowling. So,
yeah.
but then what myself and the bowling coach were doing is watching how what he was doing in the drills. Then when he was
Mm,
bowling and he was just thinking about top of off, was carrying
mm,
over. And that was the beauty of it, of
yeah.
just seeing. So, like a weighted vest, to be honest, it's just for a bit of contrast, a bit of overweight work. So
Mm,
he'd bowl two with the vest on and take one off and bowl the last one, and he would feel the difference and really flow through and be efficient. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it was about building the constructs of the body, what we wanted to see in the action, we were doing in the drills, and then letting him bowl. It's almost
mm,
like, when you were young and you had a car that you pulled the wheels back loads of times and then let it go. It was like that. I'm looking around and thinking, actually, a lot of people
yeah.
here still, because I'm 44. So, but when we were young, that was the height of the best toy you could get.
It was a long
Because
time ago.
almost like when you take the vest off, Moz, what did it then feel like? That
Well, it was just the way it wasn't heavy. It just had to be a couple of kilos or whatever, and that was enough. Though when you're bowling with a couple of kilos extra weight, it feels like you're bowling with loads more weight, and then you take it off, and critically that made me feel so quick through the crease and snappy, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve my back foot stiffness. Do it with the weighted vest on, and you try overtraining it, take it off, bang, and
mm,
it was just instant. But
yeah,
I didn't have to do anything different. I was just trying to bowl as fast as I could within
yeah,
with rhythm and stuff. And
yeah,
then so let's say there was three exercises. I do do one in the gym, like a hamstring related one, then
Bicep press,
go
yeah.
into like a back foot contact med ball throw. And of course
mm,
that's where Julie's on about. I was thinking about trying to be quick off my back foot there, and I was thinking a little bit technically and trying to drive my hip through. But that was with the med ball. As soon as I picked up the cricket ball. So doing these back to backs, I go 1, 2, and then as soon as I pick up the cricket ball, I'm thinking about the top of off stump. So I put the weight
you're,
vest on. I'm thinking about hitting the top of off stump, bowling with this weight
yeah,
vest. Okay, and so all I do
mm,
is come in, bang, right, hit the top of off stump, excellent. Take it off, same thing. So actually, from a skill point of view, at that point, I wasn't at all thinking, where's my front, where's my
yeah,
arm going, where's my back,
mm,
what's my
yeah,
back leg doing and stuff. Because if you do that and you're trying to hit execute a
mm,
skill, you are just you're not going to do it, in my opinion. And that's where I
yeah,
struggle sometimes. Talk about going back to reinvestment. When I got it wrong, I'd overthink and go too technically, and then I'm
mm,
starting to things aren't automatic. And so I think that's what
yeah,
we were doing in those drills.
yeah.
Everything was just conscious, and it just naturally flowed through. It was great.
And that's a really, really useful snapshot for people to think about, for other players to think about in terms of, for me, that is still it's still performance mode. Because as you say, there's a task there, based on like that performance outcome. And as you say, you were trying to stay in that flow state, which you would want to be in when you're under pressure, which is basically not thinking about too much and thinking about the whole part rather than the smaller parts, and thinking about that outcome. Um, for other players here that are very much working, I'm sure there's a lot of people here that are very much working, and we all are at all levels. I'm sure there's never a stop point, but working on technique. If I can ask you both, Moz and Juicy, what did that look like when that was purely volume training? There wasn't necessarily top of off target, or there was no competitive target there. It was just you training, um, like repeated volume to try and strengthen a specific area, or to like your hip, your foot placement, those kind of things. Did you?
So that
Sorry.
sorry. And yeah, I was going to say, so a lot of the time we couldn't get into the indoor school because obviously, Worcestershire, even though it was one of the 18 counties, didn't have its own indoor school to train from. So that we could only do it on certain times. So other times we'd have to make do in the gym. So, I mean, you remember what the size of it. It was tiny. So, we've got videos of Moz doing medicine ball work down the corridor and things like that. And we'd bowl into plyo boxes off a few steps, as long as the intensity was right. So we'd have to make do. We'd have to do as much as we could in and around the exercises for them to transfer. Because that's the idea of every single exercise should either transfer to your bowling or be part of the healing process. So the volume, and if we're talking about sort of total volume, it would be slightly higher at sometimes. But then if the coaches get involved and then Moz has to do 2 other nets during the week, we can't do as much. We've got to be smarter because we can't have that many plyometric contacts a week. So it all depends on the overall plan. But the best time was, when they literally well, Richard literally said to me and Moz, right, you guys, whatever you need to do, go do it. So we were doing 2 of those sessions a week. And it was fantastic because how quickly, and I've got a video somewhere of when I broke down the technique, and I'll put it in the Facebook group after. And his action, honestly, it was so good. It was like, oh my goodness, it was brilliant. And he went into the season absolutely flying because again, he didn't have to overthink it. And well, the whole thing you're talking about is not overthinking everything. So once we take the physical side away and the technical side in a lot of ways away and say, right, let us do that, and you just think about bowling, that's happy days.
Yeah. And I think it is important to, and I've just written a word down here, is just having that purposeful practice. Is whatever we're doing in training, however crap yesterday was or last week was or what that last match was, is to make sure we have a purpose in our training of what we're trying to achieve. And sometimes it is good to think about, at the end of this session, what do I want to have got out of it? Yeah. So what's that one thing I'm working on? Whether it's like in that session with Moz, like putting a bit of pressure on kind of like your core strength in that sense and the weight, versus something where you're focusing a bit more on your footwork or body angles, or trying to focus maybe specifically more on more competitive side of things, but like batters versus bowlers in more competitive practice. So we need to make sure we really, really know what we want to get out of that session before we turn up. And even more so when you're on your own and you're just doing that mundane practice, is just make sure it's purposeful, so we don't end up overtraining or doing just kind of mindless practice, because that's where we can kind of run into problems with that overthinking and where things get stuck. So I'll move on from this. We will go back there because I'll show you some of the content around reinvestment to give everyone a bit more information. So those are the first 3. There's 7 performance breakdowns. So I'm just gonna go to the next 2. Performance ironic effect. This is basically worrying about that one thing you don't want to do, and it's the only thing you can think about, that you set your eyes on, and you can't not think about it. So it becomes that sort of avoidant led mindset where you're just looking to avoid that said thing. So we end up basically performing that error. So it's like me saying, don't drop that tray of drinks, don't drop that tray of drinks, make sure you don't fall over the dog, and you're just thinking about the dog and the tray of drinks falling on the floor, and I haven't cued you to think about looking up and getting that tray of drinks to the other side of the room. So we focus on the error. So we become very prudently led, and then we basically stumble across the problem. And I think everyone has had, I'm sure, a snapshot of situations where they've been in that moment, but for some people they might have that more so than others, particularly with some of the, I don't know, questions that I work with. There's specific competitions or specific fences that they might have a hang up on, and it becomes this error that they make the same time each time. Then narcissism, this is a very different one compared to a lot of the others, because this is obviously one of the big 5 personality traits. So obviously this would come through the personality assessments. And basically a narcissist is someone who is more self-orientated, and their motivational drivers are just very much more aligned to themselves for that opportunity to gain for like their personal glory, for them to look good, versus them being like a team player.
You can, sorry, Cam.
Yeah.
So I was going to jump in on
Sorry.
that. You can don't know if I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think, we talk about, team players and what makes a good team and stuff like that. And clearly narcissism isn't a good team trait. But critically, what I have seen is some of the best performers under pressure probably have a bit of narcissism.
Yeah.
And actually it can play to the team's advantage, if
Yeah.
you've got someone who is narcissistic, that is right, isn't it? The right term. Who is not narcissistic, and they're under pressure in a game, and they the opposition have a go at them verbally. It can really get their ego going, and that can turn into a match-winning performance. So
it's like a great fuel for them, but it's not for the others that have that sort of cognitive processing anxiety, like the ones that the boxes that you would tick, wouldn't cope so well in those situations. But for those characters, it's like, yeah, bring it on, let's have it, let's literally kind of chew it up. So yeah, it's not a negative, it's just another breakdown that we can have, because basically this person, of course, yes, they're great under pressure, and this is what we found is from some of the profiles I've looked at across other counties, the narcissist characters are the ones that actually perform well under pressure, but sometimes can struggle in moments where they're not necessarily under the spotlight, or more like moments in training, those kind of things. So anecdotally, it's not necessarily under pressure, but in other areas where perhaps the mundane training, or where they are not playing where they want to be, that's where we don't get their best. So yeah, under pressure, often that real drive for the glory, and the real sort of like, I'm going to show you who I am, and the confidence. So that person would probably have less struggles with areas such as like the emotional control and things like that, because they're very assured and back themselves, so would have very high self-belief. So all of those things are obviously very, very useful for when we're performing under pressure.
I don't think there's many international cricketers. This is a big statement, all right? It's on record, so Juicy, don't cut this out and just put it on Instagram as like a thing. But I genuinely, I don't think there are many international cricketers that don't have some sort of, I'm not going to say they're narcissistic, but they have like utter unshakable belief within themselves. They are amazing and can go out on the stage, and you just know when you play with them and when you meet them, and like for me, I found that like I can't resonate with that. I've personally found that hard. Like, I didn't find it particularly humble, but like the thing is, if you look at like top level of sport, these people are under immense pressure on the world stage to play, and if you don't have that kind of just utter inner belief within yourself, then you'll just fall by the wayside and crumble, I think. And so I do think that a lot of high performers, and the best place to be is to have absolute unshakable confidence within you, but to be humble with it. Some aren't, but they are still high performers, and I think that's it can be a real trait, or certainly a common trait that I see across, actually not just sport, actually, whether that's business as well. Some strong business leaders just absolutely back themselves and don't care about the the effect they have on a room or something like that, and they're very eyes on the prize, all about me, I'm driving. Anyway,
it's that ruthlessness that will get them that success, but not they care less about what might come in between that, and the relatedness, so the connectedness with other people. that can break down because they don't actually have that empathy or humility or conscientiousness where you would score really high on, where they would score really low on, because in their world they just see it through their lens. So it's very egotistic. So yes, of course, we often see, you know, the big MDs and the leaders and the really successful people would often fit this bill. But what you were referring to, in the sense that most, you know, England players would have an extreme high self-belief, high self-esteem, and the gain for personal glory. Yes, they do, but that doesn't mean they're a narcissist through and through. It means they've learned to work on their self-esteem and to equip themselves with you know, lots and lots of strategies to ensure that that self-belief is maintained, even when it's tested and they're failing, they're making mistakes out there under pressure, to maintain that self-belief, to you know, stick to their processes. So there's a big difference in that, you know, that having that personality trait. Right, so we've got two more. Cognitive interference. This is a very common one. Basically task irrelevant stimuli. So anything you could be thinking about that's off the pitch, basically. And our attentional system, so our focus system, gets flooded, and it's kind of this whole like can only retain one piece of information situation. So it stops us from being able to focus on what's in front of us in that very said moment. So it might be distraction of someone in the crowd. It might be distraction of the fact that someone's just told you what ball to bowl and you disagree with it. It might be a distraction inside your head. It might be monsters saying, what the hell are you doing here? It might be, what am I having for dinner? Or it might be about an argument you had with someone last night. So it can be any task irrelevant distraction stimuli, internal or external. And then the last one is basically state anxiety, which is where we feel the anxiety in our body, like a physiological response, like your sweaty hands, your wobbly legs, your tight chest, feeling sick, wanting to go to the loo, all those kind of things. And what can often happen is that we respond to it in a way that we want to sort of almost get rid of it or sort of move it aside. And often we will sort of increase our effort. And when we then increase that effort, we're taking ourselves out of that flow state, aren't we? We're sort of doing too much or doing too more to try and get rid of it, move it, pass it, or just responding to it. So what can often happen is just it doesn't become effective. It's not useful. So I will send those 7. I'm pretty sure I already sent them. I will send them to you, Juicy, because I think it's useful for everyone to just go through that list of 7 and just tick which ones do I think are quite relevant to me when I break down. So when you break down in performance, aka when it doesn't go well, what do you think often happens? Okay. Just as we kind of mentioned earlier, there are no good and bad, and actually some of those bad personality traits that we would label as bad, like this being psychopathic and the narcissist, would actually sometimes have quite a few strengths under pressure. Not necessarily the rounded team player that's, you know, really pleasant person to be around on a Monday morning to share your problems with, but bloody brilliant under pressure. So it's really, really useful, and I think important for all of us to understand ourselves, not just the performance processes, but understand yourself. Like with Moz in his profile, Moz, you know, a lot of your characteristic strengths being humble, being hardworking, having that humility, always repeating to yourself, you know, almost like I'm never better than anyone else. Like I've always got to be working harder than everyone else. And that humility has come through in your profile, but those are all characteristic, and your conscientiousness, I think you scored high in agreeableness. All of those are very sort of personality traits, but they really, really kind of, we understand you better in a sort of cricket environment, training environment, a match day environment, when we're looking at those personality traits of how that makes you the player that you are. So sometimes it's just good for people to have a reflect.
Sorry, yeah, I was just on those, having read them out. I mean, on reflection, it's pretty honest reflection here. I think I'm happy that those are obviously the traits that were pulled out. You know, that lines with my values, etc. But in all honesty, that's probably the reason why I never performed consistently well under like major pressure. I'd say like major kind of key tournament games and stuff like that. I did okay, but I didn't not probably as well as some, and it's probably because I just didn't back myself enough, frankly. Or I'd overthink things, or I didn't really have. That's the truth. Talk about humility being a really key value of that. That I try and stick to and live my life by. But by doing that, I'd almost sort of strip away myself internally. I think I would always try. I'd never like over celebrate my successes, and I'd always be very conscientious with um always looking for areas to improve on, which is great. But equally, going back to what I said previously about having, top performers having unshakable internal confidence and backing themselves, I think that was my downfall, actually, to be able to actually properly, take the bull by the horns in kind of big game situations.
Yeah.
Some pretty honest reflection there that I've probably never shared. So I'm quite happy
Thank you
to be
for
honest
sharing
about
that.
that with
I'd,
everyone.
I'd jump in there, mate, and I would say maybe a little bit, but also because of the way you were the easiest to drop as well. Because the coaches knew they weren't going to get a massive earful from you. You might talk to them, but because you wouldn't rant and rave, there was definitely a couple of times when you definitely shouldn't have been dropped. But it was almost the easier option for coaches to think, well, Charlie won't make a fuss here.
But
And I
also
think you
sometimes it's
very
just
well.
one person's opinion, isn't it? And we're not all
Yeah.
going to agree on it. And you might have had a couple of bad weeks, then that's all it can come down to sometimes. But this does like literally jog my memory, Moz, with talking to you about it, because what you've basically said is having all these nice personality traits didn't make you that ruthless person that really believed in yourself, like in a sort of hardcore perspective under pressure. But what we definitely talked about with the sessions that we had and the conversations we had is you can have those two at the same time, but it's almost like that personality trait that almost is so sort of stuck to you. It's so important to be that good, nice, genuine, conscientious, nice person, to never overstep the mark to affect someone else. It's almost like being that big bravado, I 100% believe in myself, I 100% can do it. It just almost, for you, almost felt quite an extreme movement, like in regards to like your self-belief system.
Yeah, I would have had to put it on as a persona.
Yeah, like it's a big mask, right?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
guess what we did talk about is constantly, I think our biggest conversations were around how we improve your self-belief, how we develop that self-belief, the self-esteem, the self-worth, the self-efficacy. I can do it, I feel good, and I know I can do it, that self-belief behind the task. And I think we can have that, but as you say, when we take it to then that extreme, it almost felt like it was something not part of you, because it came back to that sort of inner core value that that's you as that person, and understanding that's you as a person. Which, so I'm trying to kind of relate to everybody else here, is understanding who are you as a person. It's so important to know that and understand that, otherwise we wouldn't have got to that place and that crossroads of understanding, right, how do we work on that? How can we have those two values? How can we extend that self-belief? It doesn't necessarily mean we have to be, people often think, oh, I have to be an arrogant dickhead to be like that. Oh, I have to be this, big bravado, leader, and those kind of concepts. And I guess we have stigmas, and schemas in our heads, don't we, of what a certain person is and isn't. And I think it's sometimes very difficult to move towards those different characters. But I think when we're looking at performance development, sometimes we do talk about like role playing and putting on a hat. So it doesn't necessarily mean that's me, but I'm going to put on that big ego hat, or I'm going to put on that, you know, slightly selfish hat or that aggressive hat when I need it. And that can be quite useful. And sometimes using players that are well-known players, perhaps England players, that we kind of admire their qualities, but perhaps something very, very different from our own. And then we discuss what those qualities are and think about how can we just kind of incorporate some of them into our training, or just, you know, how we walk out onto the pitch in regards to, you know, that self-belief. What does that look like? And what does that look like on someone that really owns it versus what does that look like on me? So I think that can be quite a useful task, you know, visualization and using snapshots from watching others of you know, areas that we admire. So I'm just going to go on to I'm just going to read this bit here because this is quite useful. What can happen when our strengths can become like overplayed as a weakness? So Moz, in your sense here, sometimes, yeah, the over-conscientiousness could lead to perhaps the overtraining or overdoing. And I think one of your like core values was always, you know, making sure you work harder than everyone else. And sometimes then that could have become not necessarily a weakness, but something to keep an eye on, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, again, self-reflection. Probably because I just didn't back myself enough, actually. I think at the time that's why I just felt like I had to do more to actually like prove to myself that I was good enough to perform on the field. If I'd had a bit more self-belief, then I probably wouldn't have trained as much. So that's the truth.
So it's like the load doing more made you feel better, that you could
Well, it
allow
felt like I
yourself
was
to
more
feel better.
prepared. And I felt if I was more prepared, then I've got a better chance of having success. And the reason why I'm
Yeah.
sharing this actually is I think I speak to a lot of cricketers on the you know on the cricket strength community and wider and across the professional game and stuff. And I think a lot of people actually don't back themselves, don't have, you know, it would look, the world isn't full of like arrogant, egotistical people that just back themselves. I don't think that's the case, and that's definitely the rarity. And so I think a lot of people do, in my opinion, you know, have a bit of self-doubt and stuff. And so why am I sharing this? It's because, you know, if you can relate to that, just have a think about what Cam is saying, to try and help push your confidence forward, to help improve you know, your performances going into next summer on the field, if you're going through a stage where you're not feeling like you quite back yourself, or or you generally don't, and that's okay. And I, you know, from my self-reflection, that's certainly why I probably overtrained at times, because if I'd actually just thought, yeah, actually I'm pretty good here and I'm just going to turn up and perform tomorrow, then I probably wouldn't have been bowling quite as many top of off deliveries in practice the day before. There you go. That's
With your profile, I remember it literally, the kind of like tagline of it was like the full preparation profile, like for you, lining all the dots, doing all the detail, doing everything really thoroughly was the one thing that then allowed you, not the one thing, but the most important thing that allowed you to then feel more confident going in. But yeah, as you say, it can lead to that sort of potentially doing too much, and it was never actually leading to the full confidence. It's always you do more to chase that feeling. Okay, so this is just a breakdown summary page of the performance ironic effect. So like how it would come up in a profile. So basically, this is the sort of like the don't do it mindset. So I'm sure everyone can relate to this one. You're batting, you've hit a particular shot somewhere, and you're like, that was really awful. Don't do that again, you know, and you kind of don't allow yourself to think about what I actually need to do, how I reset, what I'm going to do to change that, and just give ourselves a very rational instruction. But instead, we go to that avoidant led mindset. And so we go to that flight mode, threat mode, whatever you want to call it. And nothing good comes from that. It becomes all dysfunctional. So what can that look like if we're finding out that we tick the box of performance ironic effects. Quite often the person will show high levels of neuroticism. So neuroticism is basically more emotional and reactive. So the sort of up and down profile. So that would be internal worrying, internal thinking, ruminating thoughts, negative thoughts, those kind of things, and quite up and down with the emotional feelings. So feeling sad, low, upset, frustrated, those kind of emotions. So not a lot of control, basically, the emotional control. It's very much this, okay, not level. High worry, low attentional control, so does not feel in control in regards to their sort of focus levels. Their focus is sort of all over the place. And high negative thinking, behavioral observations, what does that look like? Overthinking, worrying. Okay, so that's just a little snapshot for that one. Poor threat detection. So this is the kind of the gung-ho player that's just kind of out there, almost in that winging it mode sometimes, not really that cautious or worried about the outcome, the negative outcome, so the punishment sensitivity. So Moz, this was not you. Because I think you did, from what I remember, you did score higher on the punishment sensitivity. So when there was more of a punishment, or the outcome was more of a, let's say, had more impact on you, that would create more worry internally for you. But for some people, wouldn't affect them as much. So this would be like specific competitive tasks that we would set up in a training session, and we would see how players would react to reward versus reacting to a punishment. So that's something that we can think about when we're setting up, trying to sort of practice our performance processes under pressure, is ask yourself the question, do I panic more when I'm given like an opportunity to gain something? So the piece of cheese or the reward, I get the free cookie and cake at the end of the session. Or do I panic more when there's a like a negative consequence, whether it's a fitness forfeit, or you've got to buy the round of coffees, or you just lose on the scoreboard and you've got the least points and you're just the loser. So how we react to those outcomes is really interesting. For this one, is how much we care about those things and how much we react about those things. So the last minute panicker, the red bus syndrome. How do we see that? How do we notice that? So perceptionally blunt and unaware, possibly not very planned or considered in their sort of approach, fails to mobilize enough resources for the test. Okay, impulsive decision making. So things that we would see would be high reward sensitivity, elevated extroversion, so seeking their senses and connectivity to other people outside, acts without thinking things through, history of like just silly mistakes, poor decisions, very spontaneous, or even fickle. The Stroop test was a computer test that the players did, basically looking at their reaction times and their reaction to specific words on the screen. So there were like threat words, and then there were like reward words, and they were hooked up with ECGs. So we had the heart rate variability looked at.
Cam, I think what would be good to do, obviously, because we've still got a bit to go here, let's split this into 2 parts and then come back to it in January and have you together, because we don't want to rush it, because I think there's such an engaging content and there's so many more chats we can have off it. It would be crazy to rush it. So let's just let's see if there's any questions off that, and then just bring this one to a close and then revisit it in December, because January, because I think this has been fantastic. So anyone on the call, if you've got any quick questions, unmute yourself now and come on.
Anyone wants to share their They're
If anyone
profiling
wants
like
to talk
I
about Moz calling all the England players arseholes, please come on and talk about
think we can
it.
rewind it and say I never said that.
Word for word.
Definitely
Word for
didn't
word. I
say.
heard it.
Definitely didn't say that. And
I've got a question here
definitely
is,
not. There's some fantastic players. Sorry, go on, Cam.
are there any, just a question out to everybody here listening, are there any, I'm just interested to know, any grandiose narcissist players that we can think of in the, in the sort of big international teams?
Kevin Peterson.
Yeah, Kevin Peterson, for sure.
Massive.
Any current players? I mean,
Oh.
are there any in the England squad? I wouldn't know enough.
Shoaib Akhtar. Shoaib's come in.
Sure.
In the chat, that was trying to think across other sports as well.
Plenty.
Yeah, sure that absolutely.
Greg Cowley, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah,
Probably Stokes. You imagine if you hear what Stokes says, sometimes you're like, "Ooh, really? You said that?" But unbelievable player. So I think sometimes good players almost forget about what they say sometimes.
But you can see that he has that ultimate confidence about him, can't you?
Oh yeah,
Stokes.
unbelievable.
And that's the point I was trying to make.
And he's a great
level
leader.
players have that just ultimate confidence, and whether it was around the point of narcissism, that was wrong. That's not right of me to link
You
that.
said it, Moss.
No, I didn't. Not specifically. But what I did say was around that all top players across sport, whatever sport, have like just utter confidence they do, and it's something you clearly need to have in order to do well, because as I say, you're under so much pressure when you're out on that pitch.
And some of them,
And nobody's there to hold your hand. Like when you're out in those moments, and you've got 30,000 people shouting, from a packed stadium, and you've got to bowl a Yorker to win a game, and there's 2 runs needed off the last ball. Like no one, you've got your teammates around you, but nobody is there to hold your hand and deliver that ball, that Yorker, at that moment in time. So you have to back yourself and have that, that just complete unshakable confidence that you can do it. Of course, with the all the other technical attributes and performance attributes that you need to get to that level, but that is a critical point. Sorry, that is a critical factor that I see anyway. Just to really
let's leave it there, I think. And like I said, let's revisit. But fantastic. I was fascinated, obviously, because I lived this as well, seeing these two chat and how they work together, and how particularly Moz was in his playing career. It is fascinating to see inside a little bit. But guys, thank you for everyone who came on. This will be uploaded into the members page and the Facebook page very, very soon. And then we will reconvene. We'll find a good date in January to come back on and do part 2. So if you can just unmute yourselves and just say thanks to Camilla and Moz, that'll be fantastic.
Thanks, Cam.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, everyone.
Excellent. And great stuff. And Cam, we will see you in the new year. So have a great Christmas with the young family. And everyone else, we will see you Wednesday night for Injury Clinic. And then if you want a one-to-one call with Moz, we'll be putting a new link up very soon, because he's now got his own Zoom link, which is he's earned.
Exciting.
He's got his stripes. So we're sorting that out this week. So there'll be 4 spots available, 8 till 9 next week. So as soon as that's done, we'll get it out. But we'll see you all soon. Thanks very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Cheers.